There are countless stories from cases to be told, some small, some big, some just quirky and crazy, right? But looking back, especially the ones that we'll cover in this episode, there are ones that really stick with you. There are ones that kind of stand out from the rest. So excited to kind of talk about some of those experiences and to have that moment to reflect on how that shaped us as attorneys and still impacts us on the bench today.
Sentimental.
What up, what up, what up? We are back again for another episode of the Unscripted Order Podcast. I'm your host, B. Smalls.
And I'm D. Bugg. Welcome back. Welcome back. Thanks for rocking with us again, folks.
What's up, man? What's up?
Not much, man. Back. Same old same. Back to another one.
Back for another episode, man. We are so excited that y'all are continuing to rock with us. Season 2 is well underway. And we're just super excited, super thrilled that y'all keep following us and y'all are telling people about us and what we're trying to accomplish over here on this platform. So we don't take it lightly that you guys are showing us the love that you're showing us. So if you would do me a huge favor, if you would go to Instagram and follow the Unscripted Order Podcast on Instagram. Go find us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and you can also find us on Spotify and find us on Apple Podcasts and on those respective platforms. If you would mind, give us 5-star reviews so that algorithm hits just a little bit different, and we get the love from the people because we love y'all and we feel the love that y'all are giving us. So. We appreciate y'all.
Yes, indeed. We most definitely appreciate it. Make sure you spread that word to the algorithm so they know that you appreciate us. And we got to spread the word to you like we always do, that because we talk about the law here and legal-related issues, we have to tell you that nothing in this podcast is intended to establish any type of attorney-client relationship or give any form of legal advice. If you have a legal question about an issue, we highly suggest and encourage you to talk to an attorney that practices that area of law near where you live in. Everything in this podcast is all for informational and everything, even the bloopers and the outtakes, everything in this podcast is only for informational and entertainment purposes only. Yes, indeed.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah.
So what's been going on, man?
Man, same old, obviously, work and the adventures of parenting. Been able to carve out some more time coming off of the holidays. To myself personally and to my little guy, there were a lot of Lego gift sets.
Okay.
Or Legos as gifts.
Yeah.
So we've been putting those together. One that I have my eye on for quite some time is the Audi, I think it's the Audi e-tron.
It's
the Audi SUV. It's a Lego set, and it's a fully remote control car, engine, everything.
Is that the one did I see y'all post?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's got a little get up to it too.
Okay.
Bluetooth, so you can play from your the remote control is an app on your
Okay.
phone.
Okay.
Bluetooth
Okay.
connected. Has incredible suspension and everything. So one of the Lego Technic sets that we put together, and we're working on now Mario and his kart. So getting time, man. Love to get a chance. It's something my son and I like to do together. Kind of our little joint hobby that we get into, and we work well as a team on the Legos. But man, it's a good way to slow down things and just have something that that's for us that we do as a hobby. So been getting into that a lot more. How about for you?
That's what's up. So I got a couple guys that I work out with, and we have started a tradition. We must have been back in the fall. Cracker Barrel was having a special, and basically it was one of the holidays, I think. They was like, look, if you come in here, it's all you can eat pancakes for whatever it was, like $5 or something like that. It was something crazy like that. So we go in there, and look, I've been going to Cracker Barrel for a good portion of my life, and I don't know if I really developed the appreciation for how good their pancakes were until this season of my life. When I tell you Cracker Barrel has some good pancakes, they got some good pancakes. Okay. So we started this tradition where once maybe every couple of months, we will go work out first thing in the morning. And then when Cracker Barrel opens, we'll go ahead and be there when they open. You know, we got the place to ourselves anyway at Cracker Barrel, 6 o'clock in the morning.
All the people that work there.
Yes, except for the people that work there. Matter of fact, we walked in before some of them. So anyways, we started this tradition where we play the credit card game. You ever seen the credit card game?
I have seen the credit card
Okay.
game. And I know from seeing it on your Instagram, I'm not jumping at the breakfast invitation. I know better.
So for those of you who don't know, the credit card game is this. Everybody pulls out their credit cards and lays them down on the table. And what happens is the waiter or waitress who is assisting us on this glorious morning is tasked with the responsibility of closing their eyes, mixing the credit cards around, and whichever credit card he or she pulls out, that person is responsible for paying for everybody's meal. And that might mean you paying for the meals that are on the table, everybody eats there. More than likely, you probably taking home to, something for the family or, whatnot. You'd be on the hook for that too. So we've kind of made this a tradition, and I think we've gone 4 times at this point in time.
Okay.
And at various times, it's sometimes it's 3 of us, sometimes it's been 2 of us, sometimes it's been 4 of us, and each time we went, the first 3 times, I walked away unscathed, and I feel like they, were resenting the fact that my credit card had not been selected, and so the last time we went, it was a CO conspiracy because when I tell you, because the thing is, you're supposed to close your eyes and just grab a card. Well, this time, I think Dre had actually paid for it twice. And so, this guy had actually, the first time I think we did this, he was the waiter at Cracker Barrel. And so, he basically promised Dre, like, your card is not getting selected. And so he's like mixing the cards around. He kind of looks at me, kind of, points. And I look, if I can find the B-roll, I'll post it. He kind of points at me and then goes straight from my card, like looking right at me, like, for real? This how we do? So, but it's all good, I mean, hey.
It comes back.
It does. So. But yeah, so that's kind of, we've been having a little fun with that here recently, the last few months. So.
Yeah, I've seen those. I'm good on those breakfasts.
Yeah. Hey, come on. The more the merrier.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, today's episode is, to me, I think, maybe one of the most powerful episodes that we've done. And this episode is going to be about the case or the cases that changed us. And, everybody knows before we were judges, we were lawyers. And I will tell you that most lawyers will be able to tell you stories about individual cases that to the day they die, they will remember those cases for, whatever reason. And so today we're going to talk about a case or two, that has had an impact on us. And, maybe has shaped and molded us even today as lawyers. So as judges. So I'm excited about this episode. Any kind of initial thoughts?
Yeah, same. There are countless stories from cases to be told. Some small, some big, some just quirky and crazy, right? But looking back, especially the ones that we'll cover in this episode, there are ones that really stick with you. There are ones that kind of stand out from the rest. So excited to kind of talk about some of those experiences and to have that moment to reflect on how that shaped us as attorneys and still impacts us on the bench today. So,
Yeah. So, just to kind of kick it off,
yeah.
is there a case or two that that in your mind has still something that that maybe impacted you, that you still think about to this day?
There are quite a few, and I will say some of the first ones started when I was practicing here in the Richmond area.
Okay.
Very early on in my legal career. So I worked for um, Mary Janice fresh out of law school when I was here in the Richmond area, and when he was here on earth with us, was one of the greatest criminal defense attorneys in Central Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia. But because of his stature and me working in his firm fresh out, I got great experience because of just the types of cases that were coming to him. And one of the first cases I got a chance to work on, I worked there as a second year law school student and third year law school student, so I can't recall if this was on my third year practice certificate or when I was there as a first year associate. But we represented a guy who in the late 70s, early 80s, perhaps 80, 81, here in the Richmond area, ultimately was charged with rape and convicted of rape. And just a little other facts so you can understand the case. He was the complaining witness in the case. Let's say she's sexually assaulted on a Thursday. Someone breaks into her place and sexually assaults her, and they get away that day. 4 to 5 days later, she has an apartment where she's on a second or third floor balcony. She says she's on her balcony. She hears the voice, and the voice that she hears downstairs, she knows or believes it's the voice of the man that had sexually assaulted her days before. She calls the police, points out, guy that ultimately ends up being our client. He's arrested, and this is, early 80s. So at that point, they take, police were called the night of the incident, and they had retrieved hairs from her bed and did the evidence collection at that point. When he's arrested, they take a sample of his hair. This is before DNA, so what they did then was compared the hair follicles under the microscope. Sure. He ultimately is convicted, and this was the late 80s, ultimately when he goes to trial. Maybe I have to. It can't be 80s. It has to be 90s because what all ends up happening is he serves about 9 to 10 years in prison on that rape charge, and he's actually released. So when I meet him, he has already served his time. Okay. He's coming to us because he's interested in trying to get a pardon or be exonerated because, interestingly, what had happened is the one of the lab techs that had worked at the Department of Forensic Science, for whatever reason, she would take samples of her work and had samples of her work at home. She passed away. And her family finds all of these different samples in the house, and somehow that gets back to the Department of Forensic Science or perhaps state police. I'm not sure how, but long story short, because now in 2006, DNA exists, that evidence was tested. Turns out the hair wasn't a match for him, right? So that's the context of when he comes to us as a client and, young attorney working on the case. I remember doing the initial interview with them and taking notes. And for most clients, over the life of their case, you begin to develop a rapport and a relationship with them. You're learning about their experience, and in those conversations with him, I'm learning about what his experience was being incarcerated for something that he's always said he did not do. And the biggest impact and why I always remember this gentleman is because it reminds me of the importance, and this was something I carried with me as an attorney for all my cases. It reminded me of the importance of doing the best that I could do to get it right the first time. Because as a criminal defense attorney, people are always asking you, how do you represent guilty people?
Sure.
How can you stand beside someone who you know is guilty and represent them? And it's about making sure the system operates the way it's supposed to. If they're guilty and they're found guilty and it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt, then they should receive a just sentence. And that's not only from just the guilt or innocence sentencing phase as well. So that's always the way I would describe it. But it always has come from one of the first clients, because in that time that he's serving that 10-year sentence for a rape that he did not commit, he himself was raped in prison. So even if we were successful in getting him a pardon from the governor and getting him some level of closure as it relates to the legal documentation, but there's nothing that can be done about the impact of what happened to him while he was in prison.
Wow.
And it is the clearest reminder when you're working on a case as an attorney, and that was, this is I think this might have been before I even officially had bar results, but to be working with someone and understand the importance of, on a trial level, I need to make sure I'm hitting everything that I can to make sure that I am not playing a part in an innocent person being wrongfully convicted. So that's one of the first ones when we first talked about having this episode in terms of, cases that stuck with us. That's the furthest back one that certainly sticks with me. Another one that drives home kind of the humanity in it, again, being a criminal defense attorney always comes with that question of how can you represent folks, but understanding that these are people, right? Most of our clients, or at least when I was practicing, most of the people you represented weren't bad people. They did bad things in a moment, but for the most part, there were very few folks that were just true, incorrigible criminals that were consistently doing it. There are some, but not all of them. But again, this was first starting out in the Richmond area, kind of second chairing Murray on some bigger federal cases now, right here in the federal courthouse a few blocks away from us. Drug conspiracy case, and in the federal system, the mandatory minimums are astronomical. The more weight on the table, the more points on the guidelines, and the more years. But the interesting part about that is in the federal system, they usually use the months and not the years.
Yeah, bro.
So I remember we had, and this case stood out because, again, I'm young, just getting my feet wet in the legal profession, and Murray's got this high-profile case, and it ended up EDVA tried in Richmond, but our defendant and a lot of the defendants were from Norfolk, Newport News, 757 area. So I automatically had like a connection to the case and to the client. I think our particular client was from Norfolk. But we have the trial, we're going through everything, and client gets convicted. We're going to sentencing in front of, if I'm not mistaken, it was Judge Hudson out here.
Yep.
And sentence was handed down 360 months to serve. And I remember walking out of the courtroom, and I'm the young attorney, but I look like the client's family, and when they had questions, they come to me as opposed to Murray, right? And I just remember the looks on their face because they really didn't have an idea of what had just happened. Mm-hmm. And we get out in the hallway and explaining to them, and I remember his mom was like 360 months, like what are we talking about? And I explained to her it's 30 years. And, having to hold her up from falling. And just understanding that not only is your client the person you're representing, but it has real world impact, to their family, to their friends, to the folks that depend on them. And it just drives home that importance of treating people with respect. So not only the importance of the case, but how you deal with it. And that's something that I didn't realize that I would ultimately need one day when I opened my own law firm, right? When you're talking to clients' family. And, our doctors have to have a bedside manner.
Sure.
You have to do the same thing as an attorney,
Absolutely.
right? And I will never forget standing in that hallway in federal court and explaining to my client's family that he was just sentenced to 30 years in prison, And that was that still hasn't been 30 years ago.
Right.
So those two are the first two that kind of pop out as cases that have always stuck with me. And the lasting impact, especially from the earlier on ones. There's some others that were a little bit later in my career that I think in the second part I'll get into. But for the initial ones, those are the ones that, like, especially in terms of shaping how I practiced law, getting it right the first time, your bedside demeanor, how you treat people and talk to people in what is usually the toughest moment in their life.
Sure.
You know, and they're coming to you to represent them and be a resource for them. So those are the two that kind of jump out for me. What would you say are some that have stuck with you?
So, you know, I have a unique experience being that not only was I a defense attorney, before I was a defense attorney, I was a prosecutor. And so I had the opportunity to represent the Commonwealth of Virginia, but specifically victims of crimes. And I remember one case in particular. And I remember the very first time I saw the pictures from this situation. This young woman who had been beat up pretty bad by her boyfriend, who admittedly was intoxicated, was drinking. But he beat her so bad to the point that when I saw the pictures, I just assumed that it was a murder case because this woman had so much blood all over her face and on different, areas of the house. It was really concerning, and so it was one of those things where I can remember meeting her for the very first time and having tough conversations with her about what she could expect as we went through this whole process. And some people respond okay to it, and I felt like she was one of those people, those individuals, because she just had there was a spirit about her that despite what had gone on, despite that she had lost teeth, despite the fact that this man had done a number on her her nose, despite all these things, there was still there was still something inside of her that wanted to see the better in human beings. And so that case really, for me, really stood out. Because like I said, it could have easily been a murder case. Yeah. And I remember, ultimately, a plea was reached, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. And when he walked out of the courtroom, he kind of had a smirk on his face, But she was thrilled and excited, that the matter was over with.
Yeah.
And lots of lessons came from that case. But just the importance of being able to be empathetic and having never gone through the situation yourself, but still being able to have empathy towards our common man, if you will.
Yeah.
Very, very, very important. So, so that's one case that stands out. There's another case. Young man was murdered, and was again representative for the Commonwealth at that time, and ultimately, the murder suspect was their charge. Ultimately, it came back that it was going to be a hung jury, and what we later found out was that it wasn't a hung jury about guilt or innocence. It was a hung jury about first degree versus second degree, and he ended up, staying in jail for quite some time, and despite the fact that he had the hung jury. Because for those you who don't know, just because someone has a hung jury does not mean that they are automatically released. Yeah. Okay, judge has say so in that. And circumstances can dictate that a person does get released. Oftentimes, in those very serious cases, despite the fact that there was a hung jury, oftentimes judges will say, well, if the Commonwealth intends on trying the case again, then it's going to be status quo as far as the bond situation. But the reason why this case really stood out to me was because when the family walked in, I looked at the father when he walked in. I was like, I know him. This was somebody who I was familiar with from growing up in the community, and had no idea that this was his son. And it taught me very important, valuable lessons. First of all, you don't know who you're going to come into contact with.
Yeah.
But what it really showed me was that you need to treat everybody's case with the same respect, the same dignity, regardless of who their family is, what money they might make.
Yeah.
That ultimately is inconsequential at the end of the day. But that case, really taught me, the importance again of making sure that we are treating each and every case with the respect and the dignity that it deserves.
Yeah, that's important. That's important.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about, we talked about some of those, cases that, kind of stood out over the course of our careers. Is there a case where there was like maybe a particular moment that, might stand out for you that really, maybe had an impact on you in some form or fashion?
Yeah, there's one I always think of, and it is, it kind of goes back to what you were mentioning in a prior episode about when you're representing one side as an attorney, you only get that side's version of events and the story. And again, doing criminal defense, you end up representing people charged with some pretty serious stuff. So this case in particular, and I won't go into specifics because of what it was, but
Sure.
The defendant was charged with sexually assaulting his daughter, who was about 9 at the time.
Okay.
Very serious charges, obviously, and representing him, and he's detained pre-trial, so no bond.
Sure.
Every client meeting is either over the phone, and I wasn't a big fan of talking to clients over the phone about the specifics of their case because,
despite the fact you're the attorney.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about when I'm coming to see you, when your next court hearing is.
Not about the facts.
But not about the facts of the case. I just don't, I never trusted that. So I spent a lot of time in the jail preparing for trial. We're getting evidence from the Commonwealth, getting discovery. This is what their version of events is. This is what your daughter said in the SANE exam. This is the statement from this witness, and we're going through. And one of the things about trial prep is understanding what your story or your theory of the case is.
Sure,
right?
absolutely.
And I'll just say the theory of the case, one of the things involved in the case, there was electronic evidence.
Okay.
That was Google search history. And there were certain things that were searched that matched the physical evidence that was found in the house, in particular, adult toys. Okay. That was involved in this case. So search history has some things in there, and as a part of prep.
Not Legos.
Not Legos. No, not that kind of thing. Not Legos. But and I think that's the case in the prep of most cases. As a defense attorney, when you're looking at the case, you're looking at it with a skeptical eye.
Sure.
I don't trust anything, and I'm looking behind it, and even if this is what the Commonwealth's version of events is, these are the ways that I'm going to poke holes of why that story doesn't work. Sure. So as I'm preparing it, there are different things that are in the complaining witness's version of events that, from a physical evidence standpoint, I'm thinking, okay, well, this doesn't match up, et cetera, et cetera. But the search history has been a problem in the case. I'll just say, as I understood it, the theory of the case was that the questionable searches were by another family member, not the client.
Ooh, okay.
It was some younger other folks that live in the house, but not the client. This person individually didn't do it. Somebody else searched those things. And you talk about the moment, and the moment I always have been, which is interesting, at least in the legal profession. Maybe I was. I don't know if I was a great note taker in school. But when it comes to being in a trial, I take a lot of notes.
Yeah.
Like now on the bench, I'll have 60 pages worth of typed notes from a custody case. But in trial, taking notes because what the witnesses say is important. But I'll never forget the moment. I'm in trial. I'm in front of Judge Bellows. For anybody that has practiced in Northern Virginia, Randy Bellows was, you had to be on point in Judge Bellows' courtroom. I had the pleasure of working with him as a colleague for the first 6 years on the bench. He just retired. But in his courtroom, and I'll never forget, I'm taking notes, and my client's on the stand, and we get to the part of trial where the Commonwealth is asking about the search history. And keep in mind, this is hours upon hours of meeting in the jail, Saturday, Thursday nights, Sundays, I'm there. It was searched by somebody else. And in particular, the Commonwealth will ask the question, well, you searched this particular term, and again, given what the terms were, we're not going to get into it.
Sure.
But one of them was a search term that is in that culture a way that people that are looking for inappropriate underage material, they'll use that term. He was asked about it, and rather than what I understood that somebody else in the house had searched it, he starts to say, well, I was watching this movie, and there was an actress in there, Eva Mendes. I thought she was attractive, and I wanted to find out more about her, and I searched that to find her. And anyone that uses Google knows if you want to search for Eva Mendes, you would type in Eva Mendes. Right? There's no way you type in this term and you get to that. And I remember the moment as soon as he said it, I put my pen down and stopped taking notes because I said, oh, he lied to me the whole time. Yeah. And it really was, as an attorney, the epiphany that, oh, he's guilty. Because you've been telling me for 6 months you did not search these things. I've prepared an entire defense off of the fact you didn't search these things. And this version that you've come up with on the stand makes no sense. I put my pen down, and the attorney that was working with Hasina, we talk about this very frequently, but I didn't have any poker face in our meetings afterwards about the fact that that was the moment where I realized, okay, my client wasn't truthful with me. And it is a lesson that sticks with me because you can't get too wrapped up in your client's version of events so that you're blindsided for what if these things are not accurate. Obviously, you have to go with what the facts will allow you to argue. But that one always sticks out to me as a reminder, and I from that case, changed my what I would talk with my clients about as we prepared for trial. And I told them straight up, I don't like surprises. You're hiring me to represent you, and for me to do that, I need
especially
to know
not in this context.
Not in court. Tell me now.
You don't want to be shocked in court?
Tell me now. Don't let me find out from the in front of the jury.
At the same time, everybody else finding out.
How can I help you then? Why are you paying me money, right?
Right.
And it all goes back to that particular moment where it's like, I don't like surprises. I can't do my job now because you've set me up. And, even having that conversation, there were always still surprises afterwards. But it always stuck with me to remember you gotta shoot, folks, you have to shoot straight with the client, that you need to shoot straight with me. But I also need to be mindful that even after having that conversation, that may not be the case. So being alert and being aware of that has really, always stuck with me from that experience of, I can't tell you how quick I put my pen down. Like, why am I even taking notes?
Right.
You ain't here lying to these people.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So that one definitely stuck with me in that regard. Yeah.
I had an experience with a client who had been telling me a story as well about how his vehicle was searched and how it went down. And this was a case where the client was charged with a drug offense. And honestly, it was actually, in the grand scheme of things, it was a minor drug offense, misdemeanor. But it was how it all played out that led to this case really is still standing out in my mind, because I remember him telling the story, and basically, he was like, they were looking at me like I was a kingpin. And so he, we're at trial, and you start to hear the evidence about how he was suspected of, working, selling narcotics, significant amount, traveling back and forth from Florida back up to Virginia with drugs. So much so that an entire task force was monitoring his whereabouts. And so when they got word that he was traveling south again, they were in a position where they were able to ping his phone so they could see exactly where he was going to. So they pinged his phone, noticed that he was traveling to Florida, and noticed that he got to his destination in Florida, was at that destination for 20 minutes or so, half hour tops. And then they noticed that his location started to return north. And, they just assumed, hey, all right, it's about to go down. And so, what should have happened during that time, because, you go from Florida to Virginia, that's a nice little ride. What should have happened was the authorities should have gone and they should have gotten a search warrant. They didn't do that. So what ended up happening was they had basically staked out his location because they knew where he lived at, and so they knew the route that he was probably going to have to take to get back to that location. So I think their game plan was just to make a traffic stop.
Yeah.
Make a traffic
Search engine to arrest.
Yeah. And so, despite their best efforts, he apparently took a different route, because every place that they thought he was going to, possibly go, he wasn't there. And they noticed, oh my gosh, here's the car pulling into the complex. And they had somebody posted up outside the complex. And so, I'll never forget, the testimony was that he pulled into his spot. They didn't smell marijuana initially. Initially, he pulls into his space. He's having a conversation with the window down, partially down. And the officer is speaking to him. And they're having this conversation about potentially what he might have or not have. Because in their minds, again, he's got probably several keys, in the vehicle. So he steps out and the conversation continues. And eventually, canine officer arrives with the drug dog. Now, both you and I practice criminal law. And in many of these situations, when the drug dog shows up, drug dog is going to smell weed or smell cocaine, or it's going to smell something that's going to give them cause to be able to search the vehicle. To my surprise, drug dog shows up, windows down, but the drug dog doesn't hit on the vehicle. So eventually another officer shows up on the scene, and the officer, comes to the vehicle, and the testimony was that that officer, when he arrived on the scene, said that he smelled marijuana. So that gave them cause to search the vehicle. When they searched the vehicle, they turned it inside out. And they found in the front compartment of the vehicle, they found one marijuana cigarette that had been smoked at some point in time. And so ultimately, whatever their intelligence was, it wasn't good. And so, long story short, they say, hey, look, this weed charge, it can go away if you work with us. And so my client said that, he kind of felt pressured into, providing them assistance, even though he said, I know what they wanted me to do. So he initially agreed that, he would, maybe do some work for them. And then about a week or so later, he had second thoughts, had some regrets, and said, you know what, I'm not doing this. So he ghosted them. Well, in Virginia, if it's a misdemeanor offense, they have 1 year from the time that the offense takes place to go take out charges. And so, like, the week before the year mark hit, guess what happened?
They bring that charge.
They bring that charge almost a year later. And so when the second officer who arrived on the scene gets on the stand and is testifying about smelling the weed, prosecutor, who's a good friend of mine, judge now, was on the other side. He's actually questioning the officer and says, to the officer, do you smell marijuana? And the officer said, yes, I smell marijuana. And so, where were you when you smelled the marijuana? Well, I was in the back seat of the vehicle when I smelled the marijuana, which begged the question, how did you get in the back seat of the vehicle?
What you doing back there?
With, after the drug dog is come and drug dog ain't smelling nothing, how you smell the weed? Well, he was inside of the vehicle, which, for those of you who don't know, they didn't have probable cause to enter the vehicle at that point in time. And so as a result of that, the search of that vehicle became an illegal search. And so there's a term that we use in the law called fruits of the poisonous tree. And so any search that would happen subsequent to an illegal search, anything that it might yield, cannot be utilized to prosecute an individual. And so in this particular situation, the judge, who I would say probably was, probably pro-prosecutor, I mean, it was a rarity that I would have a case in front of that judge that the motion to suppress would be granted, but it was granted. And, what that case taught me was, because when my client was explaining to me, like, what happened and how it went down, I had a hard time believing, like, there's no way that he was in the back of that vehicle. Because the drug dog came and didn't smell anything. So clearly it was no, he was, he was honest.
Yeah.
Now, the problem, the issue was that the first officer who testified that when he smelled the weed, the second officer, that he was outside of the vehicle. Because remember, the vehicle's window was down.
Yeah.
But I'm like, how does he smell the weed?
Yeah.
The drug dog don't smell the weed.
Yeah.
Drug dogs, look,
Their sense of smell is way better.
Their sense of smell is
than
much
ours.
more keen than ours.
Yeah.
So, but what it really highlighted to me was that, sometimes in situations where it might not seem like the client, maybe isn't being as truthful and honest. The reality is sometimes they are.
Sometimes they are. Yeah.
Sometimes they are. So it's a little bit different than obviously your situation where clearly yours wasn't. In my situation, the client was telling the truth, that that he didn't have all this stuff, and that he didn't give him permission to search the vehicle, and but for the second officer acknowledging and admitting, I was inside the vehicle when I smelled the marijuana. So okay, so we've talked about cases that have stood out, moments, that maybe, taught us, something. Let's shift and let's transition to, the off the record. Having been a defense attorney, now being a judge, is there a lesson from some of those cases, or is there a lesson from those cases, or maybe another case that stands out that you know you know shaped your journey as an attorney moving forward from that point, and has it had an impact on who you are today, even as a judge?
I, I think the entirety of my private practice experience has shaped who I am now as a judge, the good, the bad, and the kind of in between. In terms of the lessons to pass along to younger attorneys that I would probably have told myself then, and I think I mentioned in another episode, it would stress no one case is worth your law license.
Yeah.
So meaning obviously not to do anything to jeopardize that, but also in terms of leaving things out, the preparation that's needed in every case needs to be there. In every case, you need to treat every case with the importance that it should have.
Yeah.
I think there, and this is a little bit outside of not necessarily just from the cases, but again from my experience that would pass along to younger ones. There's a way to exist and be a great attorney and a zealous advocate without being a jerk. And I think we've talked about this before, and you had mentioned when we were talking about taking on your client's position, especially in that domestic relations context sometimes I remember vividly having to tell an attorney, hey, you and I don't have a kid together. Our clients do.
Right.
Watch how you talk to me.
Right. Right.
A little bit more professional, but the point was still the same. And not getting so wrapped up in your client's cause that you forget the fact that you still have ethical boundaries that you have to operate in. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about before of attorneys that will stretch the truth or make representations. And it's all, okay, now I need to put on a show for my client. I need to win this case, but you're damaging your reputation. And the same way attorneys talk about judges talk about attorneys. And that would be a lesson learned in terms of not throwing your reputation away for any one particular case. Those cases I talked about of my client that was wrongfully convicted and dealing with my client's family and explaining to them how long his sentence was, the overall thing is just remember that we are in this profession hopefully to help people and not to harm. But whatever your ultimate goal is, that you're dealing with real people, real lives, and it has a real impact. And it's that golden rule: treat folks how you would want to be treated. The same way when we walk in somewhere and we're paying our good money and we want a service or something back or a good back in return and we want what we paid for. It's the same thing when representing clients.
It is.
And I don't know if everybody gets that or sees that, but and the last thing I would add in terms of advice that I would give to my younger self that I don't think enough attorneys do is watching other people in court. So much of, especially the criminal defense practice, is waiting outside in the hallway to talk to the prosecutor, to try to talk to the officer, to try to, go back and forth with your client on plea or whether or not we're going forward for prelim or trial. But taking the time to sit in court and watch other attorneys and watch their presentation. I think I learned so much in terms of how to be a great courtroom attorney.
Sure.
By watching other people.
Sure.
And learning from what their presentation was that was good, but also the bad parts or the cringeworthy parts where you're like, oh, that didn't fly.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know that I would do something like that, or maybe I would try something different.
Sure.
But being receptive and open to it and understanding that you don't know everything. I think some of the folks that run into the biggest issues are the people that are kind of closed off, that I know everything. And my 20 years of experience or my X of experience, or even you see it with younger folks, super smart from high school, super smart from college, so I know everything. Be open to learn, because that's why they call it the practice of law. You'll never master it.
Right.
For even the folks that we, commend to be the greats and the best legal minds, it's a practice. The
It
law is
is.
ever changing. So
It is.
that would be, some of those gems. If I could, talk to young Dontae and 1L, young 23-year-old Bugg and 1L year, trying to figure out how in the world am I supposed to read all these pages by
Right.
tomorrow. I would pass that along. But how about you? Things that might have shaped you that you would pass along.
I'll piggyback off of what you said, to go and observe others. And I'll take it a step further. Find a mentor.
Oh yeah.
Get a mentor. Somebody that maybe you have seen in court. Maybe somebody that, one of the things that I know that when I was a prosecutor and I was thinking about going into private practice, witnessing and seeing other attorneys who I had seen on the other side. Like, okay, I like how they did this. I like how they did that. I like their approach. And it might even been in the case that I was involved in. And, it was one of those things where I might see something, and then when it was time for me to go into private practice, I was like, okay, let me reach out to this individual, just on the off chance they'd be willing to have a conversation with me. And by and large, those individuals were. And, I've said this before, you were one of them. I appreciate you, taking that call and being willing to, mentor me as I was looking to transition from being a prosecutor to becoming a defense attorney. But there were others as well. And so get a mentor. Find somebody that you respect, and they're doing things the right way. Because you can also have a mentor that's doing things not the right way. I think we all
there are enough of those.
Know those individuals, who they are, run from them. Okay, no, whatever they doing,
don't do that.
I heard I had a mentor one time that says, observe the masses and do the opposite. Whatever they doing, don't do it. So that's one thing I would encourage my younger self. But the other thing is this: it's good to have mentors. It's good to respect what they do, but don't try to be them.
Be yourself.
Be you. There's only one.
Yeah.
God put you here on this earth. He equipped you with everything that you need.
Yeah.
And he's giving you the ability to grow and to develop yourself. So, if there are areas where you might be lacking, the one thing you aren't lacking is the ability to be able to grow in those areas. So, I would highly encourage my younger self, new attorneys, aspiring attorneys, to make sure that you be yourself. Don't, because, I've seen some phenomenal trial attorneys, but their style, their approach wouldn't work for me. And so, and sometimes you learn the hard way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the preacher that hoops and hollers. If you're not a hooper or holler,
It ain't gonna resonate.
it ain't gonna resonate.
Yeah.
Them people gonna know that ain't genuine. That ain't who you are. And so don't be getting up and hooping and hollering in court.
Yeah.
if that's not who you are as an individual. So get a mentor and make sure that you are true to yourself, who you are. And then finally, you kind of talked about this a little bit. Treat people the right way. Respect, dignity. I can remember there was a case I had as a prosecutor where the defendant on the other side, I don't even remember what they were charged with, but I ended up, having enough interaction with them through the court process that when I went into private practice, they found themselves in trouble again. And they came to me and said, Mr. Smalls, you probably don't remember me. And truthfully, I didn't. But I remember how you respectful you were, when you were the prosecutor. And, my grandson's case, I think, was the grandfather that, ultimately retained me. And I saw how you carried yourself. And I knew that you would be the right person to represent my grandson in this particular situation. And so, that was something that, again, that was one of those moments I won't forget.
Yeah.
But again, that's just being who I am.
Yeah.
So
That's good stuff.
anything else?
No, man, just glad to bring another episode to a close.
Yeah.
Another in-person episode
Yeah.
as we continue to march along with this unscripted order thing, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, well, I ain't got nothing else.
Yeah. That's it.
I guess we'll be back on it here soon.
Until next time, folks.
Until next time.
Be safe.
Peace.